Have you ever been wrong, but still felt right? Of course you have. We all have. And the funny part, you probably didn't admit it, not immediately. Instead, you explained it, you justified it, you found a way to make it make sense. Hello, and welcome back to Bookworm. Today, we're diving into Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me, a book that explains something slightly uncomfortable. You don't like being wrong. Actually, you hate it. And your brain, it will do almost anything to avoid that feeling. Even if it means twisting reality a little. That's why people defend bad decisions, ignore obvious evidence, and double down, even when it's clearly not working. And the worst part, it feels completely logical while you're doing it. Stay with me as we dive deeper, because once you see this pattern, you'll start noticing it everywhere. And if you enjoy content like this, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Let's talk about a fantastic book by Carol Tavris and Elliot Aronson. I mean, you've got to love the title, right? Mistakes were made, but not by me. It's just so perfect because we've all heard someone say that, and let's be honest, we've probably all felt it. This book gets to the heart of a really fundamental question. Why is it so incredibly hard to just admit when we're wrong? What is going on in our brains that pushes us to defend our decisions even when they are, well, foolish or hurtful or just plain incorrect? We're about to pop the hood and look at the engine of self-justification. And trust me, it explains so much about why we do the things we do. So let's start with that phrase itself. Mistakes were made. It's like this magical incantation of non-responsibility. The thing that's so brilliant about it is what's missing, right? There's no I, there's no we. The mistake just poof. It appears out of thin air, like a bad smell with no source. It's a clever bit of verbal gymnastics that lets you acknowledge an error without actually taking any of the blame. And as we're about to see, it's a favorite line for people in very, very high places.
Okay, look at this example. This is Henry Kissinger, a giant of American foreign policy, responding to some incredibly serious accusations. And what does he say? Mistakes were quite possibly made. I mean, wow, not even a definite mistake, just the possibility of one. And they weren't made by him, of course, but by this vague thing called the administrations. The authors point out the beautiful irony here. Kissinger was the administration. This isn't just dodging blame, it's a psychological move that lets a person feel totally okay with their actions, to have a completely clear conscience, even in the face of disaster. And this pattern, it's everywhere. It is not just one politician. When the Catholic Church was rocked by the horrific clergy abuse scandal, Cardinal Egan said, "If, in hindsight, we also discover that mistakes may have been made, I am deeply sorry." You hear it again? That if, that may have been. When McDonald's got caught not telling vegetarians that their French fries had beef flavoring, their apology was for mistakes made in communicating. And as one political commentator put it, the phrase "mistakes were made" is basically the siren that goes off when a scandal in the White House gets really serious. It's the universal code for, yeah, we messed up, but you're not going to pin it on me.
So this really brings us to the big question, the one at the very heart of this. Why is this so hard? I mean, forget politicians for a second. Think about your own life. You take a wrong turn while driving, you misremember a simple fact in a conversation. What's that first gut instinct? Is it to say, oh, oops, my bad? Or is it to say, well, this sign was confusing, or I'm pretty sure I read that somewhere? The book argues this isn't just about being stubborn or having a big ego. Nope. It's a deep, powerful, almost automatic process happening inside our heads. And to understand it, we need to talk about something called cognitive dissonance.
So yeah, what is this engine driving everything? Well, a social psychologist named Leon Festinger gave it a name: cognitive dissonance. Now, I know that sounds a little academic, but stick with me, because this idea is the master key. It unlocks the reason why we justify ourselves, why we double down on bad decisions, and why we cling so tightly to our beliefs. It is the powerful, invisible force that makes us want to smooth over all the contradictions in our lives. Put simply, cognitive dissonance is that squirmy, uncomfortable feeling you get when you have two thoughts in your head that just don't line up. The book uses the smoker example, and it's perfect. Okay, thought number 1, smoking is a terrible idea that could kill me. Thought number 2, I am currently smoking 2 packs a day. You see the problem? Those two ideas are at war with each other, and that clash creates this mental static, this tension that our brain absolutely hates. We are biologically motivated to make that feeling go away. And here's where it gets really personal. For most of us, the most powerful dissonance comes from a clash with our own self-concept. The core belief for almost everyone is, I am a smart, decent, moral person. But then we take an action that contradicts that belief. we do something foolish, we say something cruel, we cut a corner we know we shouldn't, and bam, instant conflict. I am a good person clashes with, I just did a not-so-good thing. And that dissonance isn't just uncomfortable. It feels like a direct threat to our identity. Our brain immediately goes into red alert mode to resolve this conflict as fast as possible. So, when that red alert goes off, we find ourselves at a fork in the road. There are two ways to make the bad feeling stop. Let's go back to the smoker. The most logical way out is to change the behavior. You quit smoking. Problem solved. The thoughts are no longer clashing. But we all know changing behavior is hard. Quitting smoking is incredibly difficult. So what's the other path? Well, if you can't change the action, you change the thought. You justify the behavior. You start telling yourself things like, well, it really helps me with stress. Or, my grandpa smoked his whole life and lived to be 95. You find ways to minimize the danger so that your actions and beliefs can live in harmony. And, as the slide says, guess which path is almost always the path of least resistance? Yeah, it's justification. This leads us to what might be the most brilliant metaphor in the whole book, the pyramid of choice. This explains how we don't just make one bad decision. It explains how a whole series of tiny, seemingly harmless choices, each one followed by a little bit of justification, can lead us so far down a path that we end up in a place we never ever thought we'd be. It's basically the psychology behind the whole idea of a slippery slope. I mean, think about it. You see this all the time, right? In politics, in families, everywhere. You have two people who start out with pretty much the same values. But 10 years later, they're on completely opposite sides of this huge moral canyon, and they can't even understand how the other person thinks. How does that happen? It's usually not one big dramatic break. The pyramid of choice shows us how it happens one tiny step and one tiny justification at a time. Let's just walk through the book's example, because it makes it super clear. So picture two students. They're at the very top of this pyramid. They both think cheating is wrong, but they're not fanatical about it. They're standing shoulder to shoulder, just a hair's breadth apart in their views. Then the final exam comes. It's a make or break test. The pressure is on. And for both of them, an opportunity to cheat comes up. This is that moment of choice, right at the peak of the pyramid. And here we go. One student gives in, the other resists. It's a split-second decision. But the moment they act, dissonance kicks in for both of them. The student who cheated now has to deal with a conflict between I am a good person and I just cheated. So to feel better, he starts to justify it. He thinks, you know what, the test was unfair anyway, or everybody does it. His attitude about cheating starts to get a little softer. At the exact same time, the student who resisted cheating also feels dissonance. She just gave up an easy A. To justify that sacrifice, she has to harden her belief. She thinks, wow, only a truly awful person would cheat. I'm so glad I'm not like that. And here's the final result. After all that justification, they've slid down opposite sides of the pyramid. They started in almost the exact same spot, but now one of them sees cheating as, no big deal. Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. The other one sees it as this unforgivable moral crime. They're at opposite corners of the base, miles apart, looking at each other like they're from different planets. Each one is 100% certain they are right. That, right there, is how polarization works. It's a chain reaction of justification. And this isn't just some abstract theory about cheating students. This exact process has huge, real-world consequences. It fundamentally shapes our memories, it poisons our relationships, it can corrupt justice and law enforcement, it can even drive entire nations to war. It's this quiet, powerful force that is constantly bending our reality, and most of the time, we don't even realize it's happening. This quote from the book just nails it. We like to think our memory works like a camera, right? That it just records what happens, but it doesn't. Not at all. Our memory is more like a personal historian, or maybe a spin doctor living inside our head, and its primary job is to write a story of our life where we are the hero. Our memory is constantly editing our past, snipping out the embarrassing bits, softening the times we were wrong, and framing events to make our past actions look like they were perfectly justified all along. This is fascinating. Look at how the same event gets remembered so differently depending on which side you were on. Researchers have studied this. When we're the ones who did something hurtful, the perpetrator, our memory tells us, my actions were understandable, I was provoked, and honestly, it wasn't that big of a deal. We should all just move on. But when we're the one who was hurt, the victim, our memory says their actions were totally senseless and cruel. It was a huge deal, and it still affects me today. Both people are convinced they're telling the truth, but it's a truth that's been run through the powerful filter of self-justification. So what on earth is this? Greater than 100%? I mean, that doesn't make any sense mathematically. But psychologically, It makes perfect sense. And it perfectly captures how this self-justifying memory machine works in our daily lives. Here's the classic example. When you ask couples to estimate what percentage of the chores they do, it's pretty funny. The wife might say, "Oh, I definitely do 70% of the housework." And the husband will say, "Well, I do a lot, probably about 40%. The total always adds up to way more than 100%. And it's not because they're intentionally lying, it's because our brains automatically highlight and magnify our own efforts while kind of downplaying what others do. It's that little historian in our head, just making sure we come out looking like the hardworking, unappreciated hero of the story. Now, this might seem harmless when it's about who takes out the trash, but all this self-justification comes with a really high price. It literally distorts our view of reality. It puts blinders on us so we can't even see our own mistakes, let alone fix them. It's what drives that wedge between people and even between countries, as each side becomes more and more certain of its own absolute righteousness. It allows injustice to thrive because the people in charge convince themselves they're doing the right thing. And maybe saddest of all, it completely blocks our own personal growth. Because how can you ever learn and get better if you can never ever admit you're wrong? Okay, so that all sounds pretty grim, right? Are we all just doomed to be these self-justifying robots stuck in our own loops forever? The authors say absolutely not. There is a way out. And the very first, most crucial step is just understanding that this mechanism exists. The very act of learning about it gives you the power to start overriding it. This right here is the whole key. Awareness is the antidote. Once you know what cognitive dissonance feels like, that little internal squirm, that sudden urge to get defensive, you can actually catch it. You can hit the pause button and ask yourself, wait a minute, am I defending a bad decision here? It really requires us to flip the script on what it means to admit a mistake. Our brain tells us it's a sign of weakness, of failure, but the truth is, it's the ultimate sign of strength, of confidence, and of integrity. Now, let's contrast the mistakes were made crowd with this. This is General Robert E. Lee right after the absolute disaster of Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. He didn't blame his generals, he didn't blame the weather, he took it, all of it, squarely on his own shoulders. All this has been my fault. There's no hiding, no passive voice. He made a horrific error that cost thousands of lives. And in that moment, his greatness came from his ability to own it, completely and without excuse. It is the exact opposite of the universal dodge. And look, this isn't just about famous historical figures. This has real practical benefits for us today. For decades, the legal advice to doctors was to never, ever admit a mistake because you'll get sued. But guess what? The research shows the exact opposite is true. Patients and their families are actually less likely to sue a doctor who is upfront, admits a mistake happened, apologizes for it, and explains what they're doing to fix it. And why is that? Because honesty doesn't break trust, it builds it. Owning your mistakes isn't just the right thing to do, it's often the smartest thing to do. And so that's what this all comes down to, really. It leaves us with a challenge. We are all hardwired to justify ourselves. That pull of dissonance is incredibly strong. But we don't have to be slaves to it. Just by understanding how it works, we get the choice. So the next time you feel that defensive wall go up, that powerful urge to explain away a mistake, you can recognize that you're standing at the top of a pyramid, and you have a decision to make. Are you going to slide down the easy, comfortable slope of justification, or you're going to take the harder path? The path of owning it. The choice is yours.
If there's one idea to take from this book, it's this. You don't just make decisions, you defend them. Mistakes Were Made shows that once you choose something, your brain starts protecting that choice. It filters information, adjusts logic, and builds a story where you were right all along. Not because you're lying, but because your brain wants to stay comfortable. And admitting you're wrong, that's uncomfortable, very. But here's the shift. The moment you notice this pattern, you gain control. You can pause. You can question. You can ask, am I right? Or just defending myself? That one question changes everything. If this made you think differently, like the video, subscribe to Bookworm and stay aware. Because sometimes the hardest thing to do is admit you were wrong.